Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Justice Roundtable Assembly. We are a coalition of over 100 organizations working in Washington to transform federal criminal justice policy issues. We are the coalition responsible for the passage of the Second Chance Reentry Bill. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the quarterly Justice Roundtable Assembly, December 4th, 2019. This date itself is rather auspicious, I guess you could say. We're really just a little bit over 1 year since the Justice Roundtable spun off as an independent entity. Yay! I'm the convener of the Justice Roundtable and the principal of the Taifa Group, LLC. For those who don't know, the Justice Roundtable is a coalition of over 100 organizations working primarily in Washington, primarily on federal criminal justice policy reform issues. We've been around, believe it or not, since 2002. Around our table, I would say, was birthed what ultimately became known as the Second Chance Reentry Bill in 2008, what became known as the Fair Sentencing Act in 2010, which reduced the disparity between crack and powder cocaine. All of that was architected around the Justice Roundtable. We work very closely with the U.S. Sentencing Commission, ensuring retroactivity of key Sentencing Commission guidelines, and we work to ensure strong sentencing provisions that became part of the First Step Act, which passed about a year ago, I guess you could say. Around our table, we worked very closely on the Tulia situation. This was way back in the day when there was a young woman who had recently graduated from law school, was deported to LDF. To investigate a situation where over half of the town's black population was arrested and thrown in jail on the testimony of one lone white undercover officer whose modus operandi was to record purported drug buys on his arms and on his legs. And that a young lawyer who was around our Justice Roundtable, his name was Vanita Gupta, who now her life is history. She became the Attorney General under President Obama, is now head of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Mark Maurer to my left right here. We've been around a long time, Mark, haven't we? A long time. And this also marks a very auspicious occasion for his organization, the Sentencing Project, of which he is the executive director of. This is exactly 1 year to the date, December 4th, 1 year to the date of the initiation of their campaign to end life imprisonment. And we'll be hearing more about that today in a few. So before we go around and find out who's at the table, I just want to give a shout out to a couple of people, because when we go around, all we're going to do is give your name and your organization before we bring up our wonderful two features for this morning. But I'm not sure just who's in the room and who's on the phone, but I just want to congratulate Justin McCurdy, who was promoted at the ACLU as Deputy Political Director. Cynthia Roseberry, who's now at the ACLU as well, is Deputy Director of Policy in the Justice Division. And we all know Cynthia, who was the main facilitator for Clemency Project 2014 under the Obama administration, which resulted in the release from imprisonment on clemency of over 1,700 people. So welcome back to Washington, Cynthia. I'm not sure if she's in the room or on the phone, but Maritza Perez, who was with Center for American Progress. Maritza is now the new director of the Drug Policy Alliance right here in D.C., the D.C. office. So we'll be hearing a lot more from Maritza. I want to give a shout out to our sister right here, Kimber Smith. Kimber, if you can just stand and just do it. back to incarceration, just incarceration. Before we knew about mobilization, all the things long before Kim Kardashian came on the scene, Kimba Smith was our poster child. You know, we're talking about the early days when the Justice Roundtable started in 2002. She received clemency from President Clinton at the end of his term, and it really was your case, Kimba, that we first used to go into the halls of Congress to talk about the harshness and unjustness of these sentences. So welcome, Kimba, and I want to say Kimba has recently been appointed as a commissioner to the Virginia Parole Commission. Having a seat at the table, but not only does she have a seat at the table, we're talking about someone who really is going to have a direct impact with respect to people's lives. And I know we're going to be talking about parole as we go on. I know you all wish you had Kimba in New York, you know what I'm saying. Lamont Carey, I'm not quite sure if he's here. Lamont is, oh, there he is. Well, I didn't even see him. Stand up, Lamont. Lamont is the new director of the D.C. Office of the Returning Citizen. A persona extraordinaire. That's all that I can just say. A persona extraordinaire. You know, whether we're talking about the spoken word, whether we're talking about policy, you know, Lamont basically has it all. So you're here in this phenomenal position in D.C. Let's see. Not quite sure. Tyrone Walker. Where's Tyrone? Please stand up. We're talking about occasions in terms of yearly occasions. We're talking about, this is your 1-year anniversary, shall I say, of being released from prison. Were you 25 years? After 25 years. He's only 27, you know, so, you know. Okay. But I really want to give a shout out for Justice Policy Institute for giving him that chance. Mark, you can stand up. For giving Tyrone that chance when he came out, so he can in fact be, be successful. I don't know if Jessica is here in the room, but I just want to welcome folk are coming to DC. So I just really wanted to take a moment to do that before we find out who's on the room and who's on the telephone, because that's important as well. So again, we're going to just quickly go around the table. You'll be introduced fully when you all speak. And then we're going to go in the audience, and then we're going to start. So
Mark Mallard, the Sentencing Project.
Charlie Sullivan here.
Karen Apps, Sentencing Project.
Jennifer Bowman, the Kennedy Center.
Timothy O'Leary, Washington National Opera at the Kennedy Center.
Samuel Kaplan Pure, D.C.
John Stannard, the Church of Scientology National Affairs Office in D.C.
Carmen Crusoe, Howard University, and Team Taifa.
Jenny Collier, Collier Collective, representing Civil Foundation and Innocence Project.
Jacqueline Craig Bay. I am a case manager at Freddie House, a domestic violence safe house, and associate producer for WPFW Radio under Coach Brian.
I'm Stanley Mitchell, and I'm an uncle.
We'll find out what an uncle is soon.
Jose Saldana, I'm the director of the Relief Saving People in Prison Camp here in New York.
Yeah, Howard Waldridge from COPS, Citizens Opposing Prohibition. We would legalize all drugs.
Mel Wilson, National Association of Social Workers.
Keith Schwarzenegger with the National Council of Churches.
Richard Jordan, convener of the Episcopal Peace Fellowship chapter at St. Bartholomew's Episcopal Church in New York City.
Joe D'Antonio, Friends Committee on National Legislation.
Tawana Stewart, Office of Victim Services and Justice Grants.
Anissa Walker, Office of Victim Services and Justice Grants.
Valerie Quinn, Interested Citizen.
Shayla Thompson, the National Employment Law Project.
Tyrus Monsteroni, a restorative justice practitioner with some projects in DC.
Christopher McNeil, Mayor's Office of Attorney Citizen Affairs.
Crystal Carpenter, Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth.
Megan Buchanan, Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. Alan Spaper.
Sasha Beatty, Association of Prosecuting Attorneys.
Dennis Williams, Friends of Guest House. Carrie Galloway, Friends of Guest House. Good morning, Suzanne Bergeron, National Urban League.
Dr. Monique Ashigan, the American Foundation.
Brianna Bishop, the Sentencing Project. Garnet Robbins Kaufman, Just Future Project. Bea Savaccini, 1-4 podcast on reentry, barriers to reentry.
Lakia Daly, MBI Health Services.
Morgan McLeod, the Sentencing Project.
Jessica Taddeo, Q Charitable Trust, the Public Safety Performance Project.
Jackie Mansfield, NCAP.
Good morning, John Clark, Child Bureau of Prisons, retired, here with DC Cure. Ron Hampton, Blacks in Law Enforcement and Peace and Justice Collaborative.
Dan Lieutenant, Program Manager, Ex Convicts, and founder of Diversity Awareness TV.
Naomi Ballard, Department of Human Services.
Kristen Royal, Vera Institute of Justice.
Brittany Pham, Council for Court Excellence.
Grace Cutting, Council for Court Excellence. Amy Fieser, Jubilee Housing. Bunny Douglas with the Iceberg Foundation.
Hi, Joe Patterson, Parent Watch Incorporated.
Good morning, Dr. Joanne Frederick, the Hope Center of Carmody Hills, and we provide counseling services.
Author Princess Deanna, guest of Carmody Hills Hope Center. Lauren Gibbs, intern of the Hope Center.
James Stokes, Human Rights for Kids.
Jose Walsh, Friends Committee on National Legislation.
Olinda Boyd, DC Defender Service, Parole Division.
Maya Friday,
Center for Justice.
James Grauer, Friends Center for Justice, New York.
Tyreek McMillan, Urban Arts International Action Network.
Julie Lajala, DC Corrections and Commission Council.
Lillian Tuttle, Justice Programs Office at American University.
Allie Rosenblatt, Religious Action Center of Reformed Judaism.
Pat Marks, DC Corrections Information Council. Danielle Neal, calling collective on behalf of Safer Foundation and Innocence Project.
Miracle Smith, Community Family Life Services.
Anna Russell with Community Family Life Services.
Good morning, Stephanie Bullia with Justice Innovations, projects in Buffalo, New York, and Abuja, Nigeria.
Leah Bacon, Council of State Governments Justice Center. Lee Courtney, Urban Institute.
Allison Young, Center for American Progress.
Logan Schmidt with Vera Institute of Justice.
Nate Pisno, National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers.
Wendy Lee, National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers.
Julie Carroll, National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers.
Tamara Civic Due Process Institute. Giovanni Vicente, CEO.
Tyler Morgan, Justice Policy Institute.
Good morning, Mark Schindler, Justice Policy Institute. Thanks for the shout out, Mikichi. We're not giving Tyrone anything, it's giving us.
Tanya Bennett with the American Civil Liberties Union.
And I think that's everybody.
Okay, if I can have a microphone up this way.
Sherry Moses. Sherry Moses. David Sanford with 1-4 podcast and Article 740.
Okay, so let's find out who's on the telephone. If we don't hear anyone, we're going to just keep going on. I know there are a lot of people on, but there might be some techie stuff that didn't quite happen. So if you're on the phone and say something so we can see if we hear you. I know there are a lot people on the phone, on Zoom. Okay, there's probably something techy that needs to occur. Someone said turn the volume up. I heard someone say hello. Oh, maybe the microphone. That's not it. But everyone else can't hear her.
Yeah, bring the microphone.
Okay. All right, so if you're on the phone, let's see if we can hear you.
Hi, my name is Maya Kearney, and I'm a PhD student at American University, Washington, D.C.
And I'm William Patterson, CEO of Universal Healthcare and Global Transcendence.
Does anyone else want to introduce themselves?
Hi, I'm Gordon, Cut 50. Ann Lumber, St. Louis, Michigan.
Matthew Bolger, Cut 50.
Okay.
Hey, it's Alex from Cut 50.
In the house. Welcome. Who else? Anybody else there on the line? Want to introduce themselves? Okay. Well, we're gonna keep going. So again, welcome everyone to the quarterly meeting of the Justice Roundtable Assembly.
Your card.
All right. Testing. Testing. Okay, so welcome to the quarterly meeting of Justice Roundtable Assembly, and I'm just very honored to have our first guest present, and he has a load of things going on in his office today, so at some point during the morning he'll be leaving, so I want to make sure that you get the opportunity to speak, and I'm so glad that you could come. Mark Maurer is the Executive Director of the Sentencing Project, and I think that there has been no other organization, I really must say, that really has been responsible for changing the narrative with respect to issues dealing with mass incarceration from a very, very long time ago, when it wasn't popular, when it wasn't sexy, okay, when it didn't get you kudo points for anything. The Sentencing Project under Mark Maurer, and prior to that under Malcolm Young, were right there. The very first report I remember, young black men in the criminal justice system, I think it was, way back then when it talked about 1 in 3 young black men under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system on any given day, at any given time. That was profound, and it really served to open up the floodgates. Mark has received so many awards and honors over the years, one of in which in particular was the Frederick Douglass Award. I think you were one of the 200 individuals who best embody the spirit and work of Frederick Douglass. Actually, he looks a little bit like Abe Lincoln. he talked so much about, people of color, black folk, I think one time someone interviewed you to be in Who's Who in Black America or something like that. Okay, so anyway, let me give up the microphone. Let's give it up for Mark Maurer. That you do plan to step down. You're stepping down from, I don't know how many years, a few years, but almost 100 years or whatever, at the Sentencing Project. It's going to be a huge, huge loss. But I'm just confident with all of the energy that's been amassed on these issues that someone capable will be able to, step in and take your place. So we applaud you for all your years of service, and share with us for about 5 minutes anything you want to share about this topic. We're talking about aging people in prison, and we're talking about the impact of harsh and lengthy sentences.
Well, thank you. Hello?
Testing. Somebody. Yeah, thank you.
Now? Great. It's always a pleasure to be introduced by Nikichi.
But just to be clear, I mean, so many people sitting around the table here, many of you in the audience, there's been a collective effort over the last several decades, and it's been a real struggle, but a real joy working with everyone. And we have accomplished a lot. We are moving things forward, even though we have a very long way to go. Just to be clear, I am stepping down as Executive Director of the Sensing Project in the middle of next year. I'm not going to disappear, though. I will become a Senior Advisor to the Sensing Project, and I very much hope to stay engaged with the field and all of you. So you can't say goodbye, just you won't see me as much, that's all. So I just want to spend my time today talking about life imprisonment. Some of you know we have, my colleague Ashley Nelson and I have written a book called The Meaning of Life, and no, we don't know what the meaning of life is, but it's about life imprisonment. And I want to talk about why we wrote the book, why we have a campaign to end life imprisonment, and where we hope to go on this issue. For many people, if we talk about life imprisonment, one statistic sort of gets them out of the room, and that's the fact that 90% of the people serving a life sentence have been convicted of a violent offense. And for too many people, that ends the conversation. So I want to talk about why that should only be the conversation. It's not the end of the conversation. For a start, if we hope to end mass incarceration, we have to talk about life-term imprisonment. We have to talk about long-term incarceration. Much of the progress that we've all made in recent decades has been around reforms for people convicted of lower-level drug offenses, property offenses, and the like. That's all good stuff. Of course, it makes perfect sense. We are not going to end mass incarceration, though, just by keeping reforms in that area. As terrible as the war on drugs has been, 20% of people behind bars today are there for a drug offense. That's 20% too much, of course, but again, it's not going to end mass incarceration. Our research shows that 1 of every 7 people in prison today, 1 of every 7 is serving a life sentence, either life with possibility parole, life without parole, or what we call virtual life, a sentence of 50 years or longer. That's 206,000 people. To put in perspective, there are more people serving life today than the entire prison population in 1970. That's what we're talking about. So if we want to end mass incarceration, we have to focus on that. But dealing with life imprisonment is also important because long-term sentencing is counterproductive for public safety. That sounds counterintuitive at first, but it's really primarily based on the fact that we've known in criminology for 100 years is that people age out of crime. We know that in the teen years, young boys and increasingly young girls become more actively engaged in criminal behaviors of some sort. Those rates rise pretty sharply in the teen years to early 20s, but then they decline very rapidly starting in the mid to late 20s, certainly by the 30s, 40s, and 50s. As people grow up, they become adults, they mature in life, and those youthful misbehaviors become a thing of the past for most people. So when we have people serving life sentences and they're in the 50s, 60s, 70s, some states have geriatric wings of a prison for incapacitated lifers, that is not contributing to public safety for anyone. It's also a question of resources. Public safety resources are finite. The estimates for the cost of an elderly person in prison, in large part because of increasing healthcare costs, that's at least double that of someone who's younger in prison. So that's a minimum of $60,000 a year, some estimates as high as $100,000. That's money that could be directed to working with the new cohort of 14, 15, 16-year-olds each year, many of whom may be at high risk, but also many of whom we could make investments to strengthen the capacity of their families and communities to deal with those coming of age years and try to reduce the risk of what's going to happen with public safety. Life imprisonment, I think, is really a human rights issue as well, and we need to be front and center with that. There are court decisions from the European Court of Human Rights that talk about the obligation to give people a sense of hope in incarceration. Life without parole does not give anyone a sense of hope. It's fundamentally opposed to human rights. Here in the United States, the American Bar Association, many other legal groups have policy positions that say sentencing should be no more severe than necessary to achieve societal objectives. Long-term sentences, decades long, do not achieve societal objectives. So what Ashley and I in the Sentencing Project propose in our book and our campaign is that we should have a maximum sentence length of 20 years in prison, except in unusual cases. Now, 20 years as a maximum sounds provocative to many people. If we were having a conversation today in Western Europe, this would not be provocative at all, because in many countries in Western Europe, either by law or in practice, it's very unusual for anyone to serve more than 20 years in prison. Doesn't mean that they don't care about crime, particularly serious crime or violent crime. It's just what should the scale of punishment be? The scale in the United States is extreme by any standards in the world, with the death penalty and life without parole at the top of the scale, and it exerts an upward pressure on sentences across the board. And that's one of the reasons why in the United States, even for lesser offenses, if you're convicted of a burglary, a car theft, a larceny, and go to prison, you're going to spend more time in prison than if you committed the same crime in England, France, Germany, many other industrialized nations. So it's the scale of punishment that has nothing to do with promoting more public safety. It's just we've become a more punitive society for many reasons. So we talk about how we should recalibrate our sentencing structures, a maximum of 20 years, based on this aging out of crime principle in large part. If there are individuals who are still a risk to public safety after 20 years, countries like Norway have a process whereby they can designate those relatively small number of people, keep them for additional periods of 5 years, at which point the entire goal of the system is to help the person become capable of being released, reduce the risk to public safety, and the like. We recognize not every state is going to adopt a 20-year proposal in the next couple of years. It's a long-term vision, but there are many policies being considered now that would move us incrementally towards that. Both in Congress and 16 states this past year have introduced second-look sentencing proposals whereby people serving long sentences, life sentences, or decades-long sentences could have a second look by a court after 10 years, 20, 25 years. It varies, but just to take advantage of the fact that people do undergo transformation in prison. On the day of sentencing, nobody in the courtroom, the judge, the prosecutor, defense attorney, no one knows what that person is going to be like in 10 or 20 years, and that's why we need to take a second look. There are proposals in many states around felony murder rule. If you try to explain to someone on the street how the person who's the getaway driver in a robbery that turns into a murder is getting the same amount of time, same amount of punishment as the person who pulled the trigger, people don't understand that, rightfully so. And so some states are beginning to reconsider the scale of punishment there. So those are the ideas that we're trying to put out in our book, in our campaign. It's informed by many of my colleagues up here, people in the audience who've served some of these kinds of sentences and the insights they brought and the personal transformations that's so obvious to so many of us increasingly is what happens, how do people get through that prison experience, and despite all the challenges, they're coming out to be leaders in the community. So I think as we combine the research and the personal experiences with new policy proposals, this is the right moment, I think, to be very bold in our advocacy and see how far can we campaign in this moment of criminal justice reform to move ahead in very productive ways. So let me close there. We can respond to
So, Mark, thank you so very much. I love that term bold. I always say we need to go bold. Those who think they're going bold need to go bolder. So again, thank you very much. We're going to go on and hear from the rest of the panelists, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. So, Jose, when I look at you and Tyrone over there and Lamont and Stanley, I mean, it's like, folk who have been in prison, you all are kind of, you look good. I mean, I'm just saying. How many years? 38 people, 38 years. Jose Saldana, we're talking about the executive director of RAP, Releasing Aging People in Prison. And I remember when RAP first started because I knew the first director, Fareed Mujahid, who had gotten a Soros Justice Fellowship actually to start RAP. You all have been doing some phenomenal things in New York in just such a short period of time. Can you talk to us about your story and just what you're doing with RAP? Let's give it up for Jose Saldana.
For those who are not familiar with RAP, RAP works to end mass incarceration, to address a crisis that was created by mass incarceration. And this crisis is that during the period when mass incarceration was launched against the black and brown communities, longer sentences were being imposed. Just about every act was criminalized. And then there's little opportunity for release at the back end. So in between the longer sentences and the little opportunity for release is a crisis. Men and women across the country and in New York, which I can speak about, were getting old, sick, and dying. And this is the crisis that we try to address through advocating for legislative initiatives that will correct this. But let me tell a story about a woman that gives you the idea of the crisis that we're talking about. Valerie Gator was the longest serving woman in New York State Prison. She passed away in August of this year. She was 61 years old. She was originally sentenced to 50 years to life. And throughout the 41 years of incarceration, she literally helped an entire generation of younger women transform their lives. The question is, why would you keep somebody like this in prison? Governor Cuomo refused to give her a commutation of a sentence. We say that a sentence that takes hope away from people is inhumane. It's inhumane to just snatch hope out of the soul of a human being. So this is what, in essence, what we're talking about. We're talking about changing the sentencing structure of New York State, eliminating life without parole and all these sentences that take hope away. Our founder was sentenced to 51 years. Not 51, 15 years to life. That's the minimum he could have got. The law says that he could have got 25 to life. The judge gave him 15 to life. The parole board added 18 more years to that 15. He had two master's degrees, 4 bachelor's degrees. He created the most effective program to address the AIDS crisis that was an epidemic in New York State Prison. Yet none of this had any value to the New York State Parole Board, because the parole board just wanted to punish him for a crime he committed in 1978. When I was released from prison, I left my mentors in prison. Men who should have been walking out that door with me. Some of them have now passed away. One was recently granted parole after 49 years. My mentors, not only my mentors, but men who have helped men like me transform their lives. So we're talking about a system that does not value redemption, rehabilitation, transformation. So we advocate for elder parole bill that provides that a person, once a person reaches 55 and has served 15 years in prison, he or she should be provided with a parole hearing to determine, just a hearing, to determine whether they're fit to return to their family and home communities. No guarantees, just a hearing. And what this does, it just gives hope to individuals, just gives them hope. Because there was a point in my life, after years and decades, where just about everybody in my family was losing hope. I started to lose hope. You know, I hate to admit that, but I did because I seen people around me dying. Since Como took office, 675 elders have died in New York State prison system. And the average age of death is 58. 58 years old. Imagine that, 58 years old. So when we talk about 55, 55 is an accelerated age for people in prison. Just imagine if you're in prison decade after decade, worried about your children. I left 4 children when I got arrested. 4 children, 1 years old to 8 years old. I worried to death about them. And speaking about the impact of life in prison, this is a separation of families. That's exactly what it is. And for those who got LWOP, those who got 50 years to life, 75 years to life, it's a permanent separation of families. Why would you do that to a human being? Why would you sentence a human being to a term of imprisonment that does not recognize the potential for growth, potential for transformation? And this is what this bill just recognizes the human being's potential to transform his or her life. I'm 68 years old now. Some people say that I look relatively healthy, and I am, because I made it my business. I ate the right food. I have family contact. That's a blessing. Most people don't. That was a wonderful blessing to continue to have family and community support. So I was able to eat relatively well. I exercised, I maintained mental health. So I survived a lot of the ailments that 9 out of 10 people my age don't. And believe me, since I've been released now for 23 months. 23 months after 38 years. And 3 people that I know very, very well, who should have been walking out with me, have passed away in the 23 months. So this bill would actually remedy, correct that inhumane sentencing practice, not only in New York, hopefully from across the country. We believe that a person, and based on my experience and those who taught me, who mentored me, and those who I mentored, it didn't take me 38 years to transform my life. I have people right now who are the original credible messengers. They are the only ones who's going to the worst communities of New York City, reaching these kids that are lost, neglected, and abandoned, giving them an alternative vision of a future that does not involve gang violence, does not involve crime. And these are the men who served 35 and 40 years. And they are committed because they realize one thing that a lot of people do not understand is that we realize our growth, in our growth, we had to develop victim awareness because that's part of our rehabilitation. And we realize that we have a moral obligation to giving back to the communities that we once helped destroy. That doesn't mean that we do not hold those accountable for creating these social and economic conditions, but we hold ourselves accountable. And that's why we have men my age going to the worst parts of New York City, reaching these kids. We owe that to them. So, RAP advocates for the release of aging people in prison. And we look at that word aging, everybody ages. So that's not exclusive to just 55. Everybody ages in prison. Another thing, we are founded on a fundamental principle, and we will not compromise this principle under no circumstances. We believe that parole justice is for everybody. We do not exclude anybody based on the crime of conviction or the length of sentence. But parole justice is human justice, and every incarcerated person is entitled to it. Thank you.
justice. Thank you. Human justice reminds me of Eddie Ellis, one of my mentors. But back in the day, all of ours, yes. Wow. Again, thank you. I mean, just think of where you all were. I mean, oh my God, 38 years ago, but half the people in this room weren't even, seriously, weren't even here 38 years. Your whole life, okay? He was in prison. I mean, it's just kind of, it's just, Charlie, it's unfathomable. I mean, it really is absolutely unfathomable. So I'm going to next bring up, let me see, how many years? 41 years we're talking about? I'm going to bring up Stanley Mitchell right now. And Mark mentioned something about folk who drive the getaway car. Well, that's what Stanley went to prison for, driving the getaway car. Yes, something horrible happened as a result. But he was a getaway car driver. He's been a really good driver, because now I hire you to drive. Well, we have celebrities and all coming in town, and Stanley Mitchell is the key driver. He's really good, you know. But, you know, you didn't really have to go to prison, I don't think, for that long of a period of time. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. Stanley Mitchell, I know he's worked closely with Justice Policy Institute. And again, thank you, JPI, for really putting these issues out in the forefront. So can you just take a few minutes and tell about your story? I know you've been denied time after time. You introduce yourself as an UNGER, so please explain for everyone just what an UNGER is. And I just want to say before I pass on the mic, the UNGER case was very, very special to me, because there are people I knew who would never probably see the light of day. One in particular, Marshal Eddie Conway, who's a former member of the Black Panther Party, who I thought would never see the light of day. He was one of the UNGER releasees. And just to say, today, also December 4th, marks the anniversary of the December 4th, 1969 assassination of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, Black Panther members, in their beds in Chicago, Illinois. So that's a very special day, you know, in my mind. So Stanley, can you just tell us about the UNGERs, tell us about you and your case, and about those 41 years.
I want to thank the teacher for giving me an opportunity to put a human face on what somebody looks like after doing 30-some years, 3 decades plus in prison. I introduced myself as an UNGER. An UNGER is somebody that was released under Maryland court decision that we had unfair trials. They knew this far back as 1981, but because of Merle Unger, that's a real person, he was able to get the courts to make it retroactive. So as a result of that, 200 black males were released, maybe, and one woman by the name of Etta Myers. All of us had done a minimum of 35 years straight. And all it took was a court decision to say that we should never been in the first place. And then to get out, you had to, some of us had to plead guilty, some people had to plead guilty to get out, even though they said we were tried illegal. So that's what it means when I say that I'm UNGER. Out of all of us that got out, only 3 people have returned. I'm going on my 6 years. We started getting out 6 years ago. It's been a struggle, but every opportunity that I get, I try to put a human face on who we're talking about. Most people look like me. And they have been up for parole several times, and because the Maryland parole system is so flawed that it's impossible to make parole. You can be what they call so-called model prisoner, and you're still not going to be released because the governor has to sign off. So since I've been home, I've been working closely with Justice Policy Institute, the ACLU, Maryland Restorative Justice, to try to remove the governor from the process. We go down to Maryland General Assembly every year to try to get it so that if a person does everything that they tell you to do to get out, that you should be released. It shouldn't be somebody that doesn't even know you. All he has is paper in front of you, and most times the parole people know you intimately because you done seen them 5 or 6 times. I went up for parole after a psych evaluation with the psych light said that I would reoffend in 90 days based on my age and the length of time that I had been incarcerated. Obviously, I proved that wrong. It's been 6 years. But I had also reports saying that I was a good candidate for parole. But the governor refused to sign my papers 3 times. So I did additional 22 years after I was recommended parole. If it don't be for the UNGER decision, I would have died in prison. I came home, I was 65, I'm 71 now. And it's been a struggle, but I found out that if you come out and you do what you're supposed to do, whether you was guilty or innocent, if you do what you're supposed to do and try to give back to the community and help others that you left behind, that you do well out there, because there's a lot of people out there that's concerned and is willing to help you return to the community.
Thank you so very much, Stanley, and thank you for always coming when I call. Appreciate that. I want to next bring up Jackie Craig Bay. Jackie, I'm so glad that you're here. We're talking about 15 years, people. 15 years behind bars. A formerly incarcerated person. I know you have been really out there on the front line since you've been out. I know you very well from being the associate producer of Crossroads with Roach Brown. Roach Brown, stand up. I saw you come in. Roach Brown, stand up. Crossroads. He always said Merry Christmas because he got his clemency from President Ford way back in the day on Christmas Day in the Inner Voices. Thank you so very much. The epitome, really, of Second Chance. So, Jackie, thank you for producing and putting together Roach Brown's shows every Tuesday. I'm happy to co-host with him on some occasions. But Jackie, you're also the manager of Freddie's House. So hopefully you'll tell us a little bit about that and share with us what you want to share with us with regard to your experiences. Jackie Craig Bay.
Good morning, I'm Jackie Craig Bay, and I am the supervisor of a domestic violence safe house called Freddie House. Freddie House is one of Roach Brown and his wife Mertine's thoughts, and they made that come alive. And we try to keep that going with helping women, not only incarcerated or who have been incarcerated, but those who have experienced some form of domestic violence. It's not always physical, sometimes it's mental, sometimes it's financial, religiously. People experience a lot of different things with domestic violence. And most people, when you hear that term, you think immediately of a physical fight. I've witnessed people who have been forced to sign contracts of things that they would do for the abuser and things of that nature. So domestic violence is something that I deal with every day. Some days it's harder than others, but it's what I do, it's what I like to do. And helping the person who is experiencing that is like fulfilling to me. As far as incarceration is concerned, there are so many people who are incarcerated who do not deserve the amount of time that they have. People who are sentenced to these astronomical figures of time relatively have done nothing to harm society as a whole. People do things basically to harm themselves more so than the government or society. And if the premise of incarceration or parole is to be all you can do in the system, then once you've done everything that you can do, there's nothing left to do. But when you go to the parole board, it's all about what your salient score is. And that salient score can't change because your age is the only thing that's going to change while you're in prison. If you've done all of the programs, those numbers can't change. So now you're stuck with a number that's not going to allow you parole. So now it's up to the parole commission to decide whether you get parole. And more times than not, you're not going to get it. I think I saw the parole board 4 times before I actually made parole, and it had nothing to do with salient factor. And that's supposedly how you make parole. But I mean, something has to change as it relates to the sentencing guidelines, because those guidelines are so antiquated until somebody has to sit down and go through some actual situations as it relates to parole, because the way that they have it written now is just, it's not feasible. Nobody's gonna make parole under those guidelines unless it's something so minor until they probably shouldn't be there. So I mean, at the end of the day, my son is doing a 40-year sentence. He's been in prison for 21 years. He's not eligible for parole because he was sentenced after the law came out. So he's doing 85% of a 40-year sentence. I've been incarcerated with people who had murder cases and had less time. And, you know, he was 18 years old when he caught the case. And, I mean, things just are not progressing as it relates to the law in D.C. They're being held in the federal systems, and it's supposedly under D.C. law, but they're using federal guidelines for District of Columbia prisons. And this is not what it's supposed to be. But no one has stepped up to the plate, and I've been home since 2001. So I've been home almost 20 years, a little more than 20, and nothing has changed. So we have to do something about these laws. We can't just keep talking about it. We have to really get out there and do something about it. Thank you for letting me.
Thank you so very much again for that. I just saw a news article where Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton has introduced a bill to assist returning D.C. Citizens in federal custody. So I'm looking forward to seeing all the specifics of that bill, because I know there's always been questions and issues as to what could apply to D.C. prisoners in federal custody with respect to the First Step Act, with respect to parole issues, just clemency, just everything. So with that, now I really want to bring up Charlie Sullivan. Charlie Sullivan. Hold on, let me try to do this right. Okay, Charlie Sullivan. That's his wife, Pauline, there. So where's Pauline in the audience? Pauline, there you are. Charlie and Pauline. Charlie, you spent 45 years. 45 years, not in prison, but 45 years working for U.S. prison reform. I mean, we're talking about a long distance runner. I think you have visited every single House and Senate office with every single member and senator from 1972, when CURE was founded. Charlie is the director of CURE, Citizens United for the Rehabilitation of Parents. And I know you did spend time in prison, because actually I think it was those days that you spent in prison, I think it was about 9 days or something like that, as part of the civil rights and anti-war movements back in the day when you and Pauline decided to form CURE. And I know you're a former priest and she's a former nun, and you all got together and you helped her. So let's give it up for Charlie Sullivan and his service.
The next couple of days, I think December the 8th, was a great moment in my life. 50 years ago, I met Pauline. So, let me say, I'd like to say that I feel like being involved in our organization, and we get a lot of letters, probably a dozen letters from prisoners a day from across the country. And so you're involved in a lot of issues. I always say I'm a jack of all issues, but master of none. But it's nothing like being asked by Nikichi to speak about this issue that forces you to do a lot of research. And I don't know if I did a lot of research, but I'd like to share, first of all, I think people know who Mary Price is. She's the legal counsel for FAM. I talked to her yesterday, and I'd like to maybe share what's going on very briefly in the federal level, and then talk about two things that we as people involved outside can do about bringing about the lifers. and some of them may be in regard to rap. You may want to elaborate on what the second one that I'm going to mention. But the first one is Mary Price. My notes here. There is hope. I think we felt that, and we're talking about compassionate release, that probably we were averaging, maybe you could count the cases on your hand of compassionate release. Well, that has improved now. We're up to, as you said, 32 people have been released. And of course, the First Step Act provides that once you're turned down by a warden, you can actually go into court. So you can shortcut and get, particularly if the person is very close to dying or whatever. So, and she mentioned too that there are about, in the federal system, they're involved with about maybe close to 100 cases. But she's trying to reach out, which is another thing to keep in mind. They're trying to reach out and find out people that would qualify for compassionate release in the federal system. So keep that in mind. The recidivism rate is 3%. One of the inspector generals looked at it a few years back, so we're talking about a recidivism rate that's practically zero. And it's very costly. I mean, this is not only the federal system, but all state systems. It's very time consuming to take care of people that are serving life sentences. Medical problems are huge. And when you're older, and Pauline and I are close to, I'll be 80 my next birthday.
Wow. All right.
And so you have medical problems a lot more. I remember when Thurgood Marshall, when he gave his retirement talk, somebody asked him, well, why are you retiring? I think he was in his early 80s. He said, because I'm falling apart. Sometimes we feel like we're falling apart. But anyway, so it's, let me make sure I've got all of her statistics, but Mary Pham wants to reach out. So keep that in mind, that you know of people that would qualify for compassionate release. Then the second point I'd like to make is that Mark didn't bring, but the Sentencing Project recommended that we receive a SARS grant. It's the first time we've ever received a grant. I don't know if we're ready for prime. We did get a $25,000 grant and had a gathering in Detroit. And it was, it really worked out well in that we had so many people who were former lifers that are really empowered. I mean, if anything has changed over the last 50 years of this work, it is that, you know, the old days, you know, you say, well, this study says this. Now you get people that have been there that say, I know, I've been there. And this is what came about, and it was certainly true with former lifers that were present in Detroit. We had about 15 to 18 states represented. And Nicole Porter, who's not here, but she's available with the Sentencing Project. And this is one of the reasons that we got the grant. It's a citizen project recommended that we receive it, because Mark goes around and has book launches in different cities. And for example, we had someone from Salt Lake City, actually, whose brother's serving a life sentence. He was there, and I think he's going to work to have Mark come out to a place like Salt Lake City to have a book launch. So keep that in mind. Nicole has strategy meetings periodically about trying to keep the lifer abolishment, actually the movement continuing, keeping the pressure going. So that's the first thing. And to reach Nicole, I've got some newsletters that has her email on it and a background in regard to what was accomplished in Detroit. We're actually going to do a video of everything that went on in Detroit, so we should have that available too, and so to be on our mailing list. And let me end up with the third point. What can we do? Now, Mary Price talked about she was able to recruit attorneys to volunteer to work with an individual who is up for compassionate release. And that's fine. But as we know, the federal system is, you know, a little bit above the state systems in general, not always. But with states, you might consider something that, and you might want to elaborate on it, Jose, is the, PrEP Parole Project. Are you familiar?
Parole Prep Project.
Yes, okay, Parole Prep Project. And what basically, it's an article that, it's a very comprehensive article, it's very detailed. December the 2nd in the New Yorker talks about it. And it says that, and you could do this mainly with states, and New York is doing it, working with RAP, that they would assign 3 volunteers for one person serving a life sentence, and they would work with that person and actually do the paperwork. A lot of time, we're talking about paperwork is really a problem, right? I mean, people have dementia, they don't know how to do the paperwork. So even that basically, but you can volunteer. I think you had something like 120 volunteers actually come to the first meeting in New York. And like you've said, and Nikichi has said, New York has pioneered so many good things in this area. But why couldn't that be something people here may not be, they may not have state, they may have state chapters that they could reach out to. Why couldn't that be duplicated in states around the country, where you would have volunteers work with lifers, work three with one lifer, and they actually go to the parole board for that lifer. So that, I think, is a very good program. So we're looking at working with Nicole to have a book launched on the meaning of life that Mark talked about. And then the second thing is to actually start, particularly with state systems in Maryland or whatever, to work with lifers who may not have anybody and are just sitting there. And that article should be read. It's very comprehensive, and how important that is, that people just a lot of times don't know where to begin that are serving these long sentences, and this would help them, having volunteers come in. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Charlie. If you have questions, I want you to come and line up right here so we can have Q&A for this segment before we move to our next feature. I really want to thank our presenters, Mark Marrow from the Sentencing Project, Jose Saldana from RAP, Release Aging People in Prison, Stanley Mitchell, entrepreneur, Jackie Craig Bay, associate producer at Crossroads, Charlie Sullivan, executive director of CURE. So say your name and organization and you know what your question is. Oh. Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kara Gotch with the Sentencing Project. My question has to do with, I guess, life with parole sentences or parole in general. And obviously there's different jurisdictions. Some jurisdictions have no parole system. Places like New York and Maryland, have parole. But, the reality is, particularly for people serving long sentences, parole is not a realistic option. And so my thought is, for advocates who are working on parole restoration, or want to create a system where there's an opportunity for sentence review, like a second look, what is the best mechanism, given your experiences with the challenges of parole commissions, to go through that process? Are commissions better than judges, or what would the ideal review process look like?
In New York, they have a parole board made up of 19 commissioners. For close to 50 years, these commissioners were people from law enforcement backgrounds, former police officers, detectives, sheriffs, prosecutors. And during the height of mass incarceration, the release rate under these type of punitive-minded commissioners was less than 5%. What RAP did is challenge the composition of the parole board. If the original meaning of parole is to measure whether the person appearing before them is now fit to return back to society, then we should be measuring his rehabilitative or her rehabilitative endeavors during sometimes 3 or 4 decades of incarceration. So RAP compiled a list of the most punitive-minded commissioners, and added court records with judges condemning their biased attitude during hearings and presented to the governor. And when their term expired, the governor did not reappoint them as they customarily do. Instead, he appointed 6 new commissioners. One of those new commissioners was the commissioner that let me go. She had a social service background. And she asked me one question about the crime I committed in 1979. And then she went on and said, let's talk about what you've been doing the last 38 years of your life. And based on the overwhelming evidence before her of my rehabilitation, she released me. And that is what we're trying to accomplish. Parole commissioners who believe in redemption and transformation, not parole commissioners who are addicted to punishment.
I like that, not parole commissioners who are addicted to punishment.
My name is Howard Wooldridge. I'm a retired police detective from Fort Worth with Citizens Opposing Prohibition, COPS, also co-founder of LEAP, Law Enforcement Action Partnership. I need to amplify what Mark said at the very beginning of this in terms of the scope of the problem. He said that only 20% of the prisoners in our prisons are there because of drugs. Well, he failed to mention, and this is extremely important so you understand the scope of the problem, as a detective, the felony caseload I had, 70% of felony caseload I had, touched the war on drugs, modern drug prohibition. So when you go to prison for 3 to 5 years for home burglary, they don't mark that as a drug crime, even though you stole the money at that house because you needed $200 a day for crack cocaine. You rob banks, it goes down as a bank robbery, not a drug crime. So and I've talked to about 20 detectives across this country, north to south, south to west. 70–75% is the consensus of my colleagues of the people in prison today. 70–75% are touching drug prohibition, war on drugs. So please understand, the scope of this problem is not 20%. It is 70–75%. And one last thing, we all want to hear a little cheerful news. Solid report out of Colorado, 6 years into legalization of marijuana, searches of cars driven by black drivers for a normal traffic stop is down 58% for African Americans, 63% for Hispanic, and 68% for white people. And the percentages are still going down as these racist POS police officers are understanding that when you stop a person like Snoop Dogg, you can't arrest them. So they're slowly but surely not searching that car as much. And you're going to see this in the other 10 states which have legalized, as the police officers know they can't bust the people they want to hurt because the smell of marijuana is no longer entry into the car. This is an important reason, social justice, racial justice, to legalize and regulate marijuana across this country as soon as possible. We don't need to see more dead black and brown people in Facebook and the side of the road because of a confrontation caused by the smell of marijuana. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold. Thank you all for coming and sharing. What I'd like to do is hear the last 2 questions together and then let the parents respond so we can get to our second feature to cooperate.
This question was from Mark, who was here early. But we talked about, I've heard things about changing the narrative. And we keep getting back to that issue, but what are we really talking about here? When I hear about, projects in Norway, projects in Europe that work, that's not what we're talking about here. You're talking about Norway, you're talking about a monolithic culture. That's not what we're talking about here. This is, even though you don't want to talk about, everybody don't want to really talk about race, but when you take race out of it, it's still black and white. And that's what we really need to address, is that there's something deeper than under the surface. When we talk about broken families, I heard Jose talk about, this system that's not a mistake. Until we can address the now and the future, we have to look at the past. No one wants to talk about the 400 years. We talk about how many victims we don't talk about the victimizers of 400 years that introduced this culture. We talk about the people, we're now the victims of it. You victimize us. Now, how do we get to under the surface of what's really going on here? That's the kind of questions. If you truly want to change the narrative, everybody wants to fix this broken system. This system isn't broken. It's working as designed perfectly. And until we address that subject, we're going to get nowhere. We're going to continue sitting at a round table that doesn't evolve and continues to revolve. And that's what the problem is, and that's what we need to start. If we want to change the narrative, wipe the slate clean and start over fresh. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And we definitely want to evolve as opposed to evolve, so thank you. I'm going to add that to my repertoire. Last question.
Keith Schwarzenegger with National Council of Churches. I want to echo those comments very strongly. I also must admit I heard the voice of my colleague Andre Alexander in my ear and listening to Mark Mauer talking about the societal objective of imprisonment. And in many ways I agree with that a lot of ways the societal objective is to warehouse and to punish. It doesn't care about rehabilitation. So my question is, how do we shift that narrative within, on the Hill, in our state capitals, places like that, people that are making the decisions, making the laws, making the sentencing guidelines, how do we get these stories of these great people here to these people to hopefully kind of counterbalance the bloodlust, for lack of a better word, that drives the criminal system, as it were.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Before we note that, I know we have one last question, then we respond to
And
that.
my quick question is, if you have a group of high school students who want to engage in an action that will affect mass incarceration and the criminal injustice system, what suggestions would you have for a good project for them?
Okay, shifting the narrative in high school students. I'm just going to let each of you all just half a minute, 30 seconds, some type of response on either one of or both of those. Is this working? Testing, testing, testing.
Testing. Well, you got it? Well, just to reiterate what I said, I don't know why high school students could not be involved in inviting Mark Mauer to their city to do a book launch at their high school as well as in the community. Secondly, I don't know why they couldn't volunteer to go in and help someone do the paperwork on applying for compassionate release. Depends upon the system, the prison system. We're not talking about any new legislation. They just like maybe working with the chaplain to have volunteers come in and work with individuals. So those are two ways. And of course, like I tried to say earlier in regard to FAM, they're looking for compassionate release people.
I got some cases for them.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. I will definitely contact Mary. Okay, hold on. Let me just end with you. Let me just go to Jackie.
You know, when I was coming up, we had things to do as kids. We would go out and to the recreation center. We would play a baseball game. We had a swimming team. You know, there were things for us to do. Now these kids have nothing to do. The average child now doesn't even have guidance at home. So I think what we need to do is find places for these children to go. Find things for them to do. You have to give them some sort of incentive, though. These kids want something. They're not doing anything for nothing nowadays. So I would say give them a movie night for writing an essay, or give them something, an outfit for making good grades in school. You have to give them an incentive. That's what I come up with.
Okay, and remember the other good question was how about shifting the narrative also.
As I say, since I've been on, I spent a lot of time in Annapolis, being around a lot of politicians, and they only respond to two things: money and votes. When we go down there to try to get our bill passed to get the governor out the process so more people can be released, because there's nothing wrong with the commissioners. Unlike New York, we don't have a commissioner problem, because people are recommending parole regularly in Maryland. We have a political problem, whereas the governor has the final say. So we don't have a commissioner issue. It's the politics of the thing. As far as trying to change the narrative, we need people to understand that you have to vote. You know, I don't sound like Jesse Jackson somebody, but you have to vote. You really have to vote, because that's all. We don't have no money. This is you know, prison population is a poor population, But what we do have, and with Jason HCI, we're trying to organize a voting drive so that we can get people aware of what's going on. So like the youngsters, they may not can vote, but their family can. And every prison knows maybe 4 or 5 people that can vote. So to change the narrative, we have to put people in there that are sensitive to our issues.
Okay, okay, thank you, and Jose, let's close this out on this section.
The one thing I noticed, high school, these kids are smart. A lot smarter than I was when I was their age. So, you know, we have a conversation. Let's talk about punishment. Let's talk about crime and punishment. And let's talk about redemption. Let's talk about transformation. Let's talk about human issues here. Who should determine how much punishment is enough? You know, and the people who have a vested interest in perpetual punishment, in mass incarceration, in the culture, and perpetuating that culture of punishment, they have no moral standing to condemn people to death by incarceration. The community, we believe that the community, and these kids are part of a community. They're not excluded just because of their age. They're part of the community. They have a voice in defining what punishment should be like in New York State. That's what I told them.
Let's give our panelists a big hand. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I don't want anyone to move. First of all, I was going to say, we were going to show a video earlier about the Ungers, and it was a little bit long, so we didn't. So I was going to substitute it for the trailer of Just Mercy, the film that's about to come out with Brian Stevenson. And I got so excited to get into the video discussion that I didn't. So you all can go on the internet and look up the Ungers, UNGERS, and watch that video. And look up Just Mercy. It's the story of Brian Stevenson. It stars Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx. It is a must-see. I think it airs on Christmas Day or something along those lines. So let me tell you, I'm a person who always loves plays. Black plays. I mean, you name it, black play. I just love to go see black plays. Let me tell you, opera. It just was not an opera. I mean, I'm sorry, Tim. You know, Jennifer, it just wasn't my cup of tea until I got this call from these folk over at the Kennedy Center. And they were talking about an opera. And they were talking about they were interested in community engagement around this opera. And I said, opera? But when they said what it was about and the topic, I said, oh my goodness. I said, oh my goodness. I said, oh my goodness, because it opens up this issue dealing with police in the community, opens it up to a whole another category of people who might not ever have been stopped by the police before, okay, who might not have ever had to have that talk, you know, in their family and expose some of these issues. So again, I want to say thank you for reaching out. Ron Hampton, where's Ron Hampton? Somewhere over here. You know, as part of that group, Kanya Bennett, you know, as part of that group, and other people as well. So I have just a little 15-minute teaser about what's going on, and I know there's some kind of special deal. But I'm going to introduce both of you all. You'll determine how you want to handle this. We have Timothy O'Leary, and Timothy is the General Director of the Washington National Opera. Woo! And the Justice Roundtable. I mean, I just love it, you know. Thank you so very much. You can share more about yourself and the like. And we have Jennifer, I don't know if it's Bowman or Balvin. I mean, okay, I haven't said it correctly. I've been meaning to ask you before I got on the microphone. Jennifer Bowman, who's the Director of Music Education with the opera and with the Kennedy Center. You can explain a little bit more. So I'm really glad that you took time to come and share with the Justice Roundtable. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you, and I think you have a PowerPoint and a couple of quick videos. Okay.
I want to say a deep thanks to Nikichi for inviting us here. When we went around the room and said our names and organizations, Jennifer and I noticed that we were the only ones from the arts community. We're very honored and humbled and grateful to be here. And I think what we hope to be able to offer in the arts is that the arts are where we tell stories, and we, as arts producers, we have the responsibility of determining what stories get told to whom and where. And so I'm here on behalf of my colleague also, Francesca Zambello, who's the artistic director of the Washington National Opera and commissioned this opera called Blue. And she and I have a belief in what we call artistic citizenship. It's our role as an arts organization to be a community organization, first and foremost, and to be contributing to the greater good of our community. So we're going to tell you a little bit about this opera, and then Jennifer is going to take the microphone and tell you a little bit about what we're doing in our hopes to surround this performance, which happens in March, with a kind of civic dialogue project that will amplify the issues that will be described through the opera. Let me tell you a little bit about, actually, go to the next slide first. Sorry that it's so small for those of you in the back of the room. But these are the creators of this opera, Blue. That's Janine Tesori and Tazewell Thompson. And Janine Tesori is most famous as a Broadway composer. She's a Tony Award winner. She wrote the musicals Fun Home and Caroline or Change. She wrote The Color Purple, that's right. So she's a major Broadway composer, but Francesca Zambello, our artistic director, has converted her into becoming an opera composer as well. And now Janine has an opera that's been commissioned for the Metropolitan Opera. But this opera was premiered at the Glimmerglass Opera, which Francesca Zambello is the artistic director of as well. And this upcoming set of performances is a DC premiere. The opera goes next to the Lyric Opera of Chicago and many other venues around the country. So we hope it will be a project with real impact nationwide. Tazewell Thompson is a writer and a stage director, and this is the first opera that Tazewell has written. He's written many plays, but he's directed operas. He directed an opera called Appomattox for the Washington National Opera, and so he's a long-standing colleague of ours. So Francesca asked these two artists to create a new opera and said it can be about anything as long as it's relevant to the world in which we're living today. And they thought about it. They decided they wanted to tell this story. By the way, those are quotations from the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal about the premiere of the opera that happened this past summer. And the words are small, but trust me, they're rave reviews. Really extraordinary, and that's been a unanimous consensus. I would say when I went to the opera this summer for the opening performance, I cried like hard, like 4 different times during the performance. One of the times I cried so hard was just out of sheer relief because the opera's really good. And we had commissioned it and taken this risk. And I thought, God, I hope it's good. But it is an extraordinary piece of work. So the Opera Blue is a story that takes place in contemporary Harlem, and it's an African-American couple who fall desperately in love. And in the first scene, we meet the woman, and she's telling her girlfriends about the man she's about to marry. And the girlfriends are mad at her because they haven't met him yet, and there's been this whirlwind romance, and suddenly they're getting married. And then halfway through the scene, she reveals to them that her fiancé is a cop, and they're horrified by that revelation. Furthermore, she tells them that she's pregnant, and she's about to give birth to a son, and they're horrified by that revelation as well. And then in the next scene, we meet the father. By the way, the characters all have these metaphorical names: the father, the mother, the son, the buddies, the reverend. It's kind of a Greek tragedy, kind of a archetypical story, but it's incredibly personal in the way the characters are drawn. In the next scene, we meet the father who, the birth of the son has just occurred, and the father has never held a baby before in his life, and now he's got his son in the hospital, and the nurse has to teach him how to hold the child, because he's never done it before. And we're actually going to show you a little clip from that scene. And then the opera keeps fast-forwarding through time. So in the next scene, the son is 16 years old. And now he and his father are in this bitter argument because the kid hates his father, because his father's a cop, and because he's 16 years old. And the son has become an activist for social justice, and he and the father have this bitter argument that is recognizable to anybody who's been a teenager with parents, or been parents of a teenager, and we'll play a little clip of that as well. So we journey with this family through time, and then in the scene that follows after intermission, we learn that the son has been killed at a protest by a white police officer. And now the story takes this incredible turn, and it's about the solidarity of the community that surrounds this family. The father seeks counsel from the reverend. The father is seeking revenge at first, and the reverend counsels him through this period. We have a funeral scene, and then actually the story reverses in time for a minute, and we have the moment right after the argument between the father and the son, where the mother brings them together and heals them because she's just made this beautiful meal of all their favorite foods. And that's the last moment that we get in the opera. Actually, the very last moment is that the son walks away from the table, and it's the moment after the funeral, and it's just the father and the mother there together. So the story is incredibly beautiful, and obviously it touches the most sensitive material in our culture today in some ways. And so we feel in the arts that we have a responsibility, if we're telling stories like this, to make sure that we're not just putting on the show and then hoping for the best, but really setting it up for success by kind of creating dialogue that surrounds the project in the months leading up to it. So Nikichi has been very kind to us and joined our little task force on creating civic dialogue, and Jennifer will tell you a little bit about that. First, I'm going to play a couple of clips. I hope I'm doing all right on time. So now what you're about to see is from a little workshop that we did. This is actually the stage at the Guggenheim Museum in New York. And so the artists in this case are reading the music from their music stands. They won't be doing that in the opera. It's fully staged. It's going to be fabulous. But this was a little moment before the premiere. So this is Kenneth Kellogg, who happens to be a DC native.
Hello. Hello, my son. It's your daddy. He hears me. He's laughing. Look, he's taking hold of my finger. Hello, my son, my baby boy. You are my son, you make me cry, didn't want to have you. Now for you I'd
Can you hear well and understand? By the way, in opera, the words are always hard to understand, so we project the text at the top of the stage. That's part of the way in which it's made more accessible these days. Everyone thinks that opera is inaccessible because it's written in other languages, and you have to know those languages to attend. But this hasn't been true of opera for the past 100 years in the United
Just saw
States.
Othello at the Kennedy Center, they had the words.
We have the
It was
words
very
projected
helpful.
above the stage. It's much. Yeah. Anyway, so the next scene is we're going to play a little bit. Now, it just is a total coincidence, but both these performers happen to be from the Washington, D.C. area as well. And these are the performers we'll have at the Kennedy Center. So you know Kenneth Kellogg, but Aaron Crouch is from Prince George's County. And when I Googled, when we were talking about casting Aaron in the show, I Googled him, and the first thing that comes up is a local news story that says Prince George's County youth to become, opera star. He was about to go to Juilliard. And this is a return to his hometown now on the stage of the Kennedy Center. So in this son, he's obviously in the scene, he's the son. And the scene, we're well into the argument now. And the father is telling the son to stop going to these protests and making trouble. He was at a protest where he spit in somebody's face and got in trouble, etc. And the father only wants for his son to survive. And the son is talking to his father about his obligation to protest the system that is creating these circumstances. So he begins with this whole thing about how he makes a mockery of the idea of America, of the land of freedom. And of course the father, who is a police officer, says to the son, later in the scene, now wait a minute, it's people like me who risk their lives to make sure that you have the right to protest. And we've all heard this song before, but it takes a different sound in this opera.
I'll say the clip starts, for those of you looking at the libretto, it's the bottom of page 31 where the son has his last bit of dialogue.
Statue of Liberty, the Constitution. Ding dong, Liberty Bell, American flag, American ass. Apple pie, apple pie, apple pie, apple pie, for the black man, all of it. A cruel joke. Stop trying to set the world on fire. Stop trying to set the world on fire. Trying to put out the fire. I'm not gonna lose you to some bullshit antics on the street. I'm not gonna is spinning fast. As black people cannot sit still. To some bullshit the world has changed, is changing. Stop trying to say that's where you and your rage and your generation behind.
Sorry, let me get back to PowerPoint.
Jennifer, I'm going to focus on getting her PowerPoint presentation back. We're having a Mac PC. There you go. The only other note I'll make about, so that workshop obviously was just with the piano accompaniment, but the opera is written for a full orchestra, and it's actually incredible what difference that makes. The opera does have a bad reputation as elitist and all the baggage that it carries in our culture. Opera is just the combination of music and theater. Actually, opera and music theater are the very same art form, which is why the opportunity to engage a composer like Janine Tesori first became famous in one and is now making a reputation in the other is a great opportunity for us. But the thing that opera does that very few other things can do is the voices are unamplified on the stage, so you're just hearing the sound of the human voice and the acoustic instruments, and it has an effect, an emotional effect on people that I've never experienced in any other art form, but obviously I'm biased.
So I work in the education department at the Kennedy Center. We do programs and performances connected to all the genres. So we work with the opera, the symphony, hip hop, jazz. But one of the really wonderful things that we're able to do in education is use pieces like Blue to bring different communities together in conversation and activities in a really interesting way. So Tim has given us that opportunity with Blue. So I just want to highlight a few things that are happening in conjunction to Blue, in addition to all of you just coming to performances. So what Tim was talking about before, our community advisory committee, which is a group of people who work in different avenues, law enforcement, public policy, the faith community. We have youth now who just joined the committee as well, people in arts and culture, just a lot of different avenues who are assisting us and helping us ask really smart questions about the work. So just to give you a sense of some of those folks who are in the room right now, Kanya Bennett is part of our group, as well as Nkichi, Ron Hampton, and Dr. Joanne Frederick, who's in the back there as well, who's just joined in because we thought it was really important to have someone from the mental health community to talk about trauma when you're thinking about how a family would be affected by an incident like this. And they've been wonderful meetings. We smile and giggle at just how fabulous and smart they are and what they're bringing to the table of what we're doing. So. Another thing, in addition to all of the opera performances on the 15th, 18th, 20th, 23rd, and 28th of March, there are pre- and post-show conversations, which are typical of opera, typical of a lot of performances. But what we're able to do with Blue is really center those conversations on topics that are much more integral to this show than just how the music sounds like. So for these conversations on each day, in addition to having conversations with the creators, Castle Thompson and Janine Tesori, we're also going to welcome folks from the mental health community to talk about trauma in communities. So Dr. Joanne will be a part of one of those conversations. We're also asking some of our really exemplary youth, like members of our Kennedy Center Youth Council. We've also met some really talented teenagers from the organization Beacon House in Ward 5, who are also going to be sharing their perspectives on, what a work like Blue means and how it resonates or doesn't resonate to what their experience is as young people, because we think that's just a really important part of this piece as well. And speaking of Beacon House, so about 10 young women, I think it was 2015, who worked with Beacon House and another organization in town called Shout Mouse Press, wrote a book called The Day Tayshawn Got Shot, which is basically these young women talking about how a shooting in a community might affect people of different sectors of that community. And they did a performance of that piece, like a stage reading at Busboys and Poets a couple of years ago, and we are wanting to remount that on the Kennedy Center Millennium stage. So that will happen prior to the final performance of Blue, and just being able to connect them with really talented actors from this area and give them a platform on the Millennium stage, which will also then be recorded and shared around the country and around the world and remain there for 30 years. We think is kind of another important part of what Blue is allowing us to do. So there will be some other activities that will be announced for Blue in the future, very soon actually, but we hope that you will all share information about the opera if you have questions for us. If there are other ways that either we or some of our ambassadors from our community advisory committee can come to talk to your separate communities about Blue, we'd be very open to that. But really, thank you just for listening to us today. And I'm putting my contact email up so you have
You
it.
forgot about something very major.
What did I forget?
Isn't there a little discount flyer?
Oh, yes. So, as you exit today on your table, you'll see a discount flyer for Blue. Well, my bad. So it's a 15% discount off of tickets. If you need more, if you need us to send it electronically, feel free to email me or, yes, she'll take care of you. We have it, share it widely, give it to all your friends, your family, anyone you want to, but because we really hope that you can all be in the room and experiencing Blue and sharing what your thoughts are after the piece.
Let's give it up for Tim and Jennifer. Thank you. I was definitely be there. My favorite arts thing. I'm adding opera to that as well. So thank you for the incentive, with respect to that. We're going to take a brief 5-minute break so you can get some more coffee or whatever over there. And we're going to come back for those who would like to stay for the working group reports of the Justice Roundtable. The lifeblood of the Roundtable are the working groups. So we give little updates on what sentencing reform, reentry, state issues, prison reform, drug policy, the different working groups have been doing over the past quarter. So you're welcome to stay for that. Also, if you ever watch DC, okay. Somebody said something.
Go ahead.
Okay, that's all right. Okay, good. So we're going to take let's give a hand again to all of our participants. Everyone is welcome to stand. The board and grab more coffee. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. One more thing. Carmen, can you just raise your hand? Carmen, this is her first day. She's Justice Roundtable's new digital content intern, and this is her first day here. But welcome back, Carmen, because you were with me when we first started Howard 4 years ago. You're about to graduate now, so welcome back to Justice Roundtable. Carmen, please. Thank you.